For 38 years, Ray and I built something most people only dream about. A real marriage. The kind where you finish each other's sentences and argue about the thermostat and still reach for each other's hand in the dark. We had our home in Claremore, Oklahoma, a modest 2-story on Maple Creek Road that we'd paid off in full by the time we were 55. We had our garden, our Sunday routines, our Friday night dinners at the same Italian place on Will Rogers Boulevard. We had 2 sons, and for a long time I believed we had everything. I should have known something was wrong the summer my younger son stopped calling me Mom. It was subtle at first. He'd always been the quieter one, the one who kept things close to his chest. When he was 17, he went through a phase where he barely spoke at dinner. I chalked it up to teenage boys being teenage boys. By the time he was in his 30s, I was still chalking things up. His name is Nathan. He's 41 now. He was our surprise baby. Ray and I had nearly given up on a second child when I found out I was pregnant at 34. We poured so much into him. Maybe too much. I used to joke that we gave our oldest, Philip, roots, and we gave Nathan wings. What I didn't understand then was that some people use their wings to fly away from you, and some use them to circle back when they want something. Philip was the steady one. He'd gone to Oklahoma State, studied accounting, married a woman named Christine who taught 2nd grade and made the best pecan pie I'd ever tasted. They lived 40 minutes away in Tulsa and called every Sunday without fail. Nathan had bounced around. 3 colleges, 2 states, a series of jobs that never quite stuck. He'd done well in real estate for a while in Phoenix, then came back to Oklahoma around 2018 saying he wanted a fresh start. Ray and I were relieved. We thought it meant we were getting our son back. We weren't. The first time I noticed money missing, I told myself I'd miscounted. Ray and I shared a joint checking account, the same one we'd had since 1986, and I had always been the one to balance it at the end of the month. In March of 2021, I sat down with our bank statement and found 4 withdrawals I didn't recognize. $200 here, $350 there. The descriptions listed an ATM in Broken Arrow I had never visited. I mentioned it to Ray over dinner. He got quiet in that way he sometimes did, the way that used to mean he was thinking something through, and said he'd look into it. A week passed, then 2. I asked again, and he said the bank was handling it. I believed him because I had spent 38 years believing him, and because it was easier than the alternative. What I didn't know then, what wouldn't fully come together for me until much later, was that Nathan had been in and out of our house while we were at our Thursday morning Bible study group. He had a key. We'd given it to him when he moved back to help out around the yard. He'd copied it, and he'd started treating our home like a place he was entitled to, the way some people treat their parents' refrigerator, casually, without asking. The real estate venture he'd come back for turned out to be less of a venture and more of a slow collapse. By 2022, Nathan owed money to people I didn't know existed. He'd borrowed against a property he'd co-signed on, defaulted, and been quietly sued. I found this out later, reading court documents the way you read a mystery novel. Except the main character is your child and you can't put it down because you keep hoping the ending changes. He was charming about it, Nathan. That was always his gift. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting for him. He showed up for Ray's birthday in June of 2022 with a bottle of good bourbon and tickets to a Thunder preseason game. And I remember thinking, this is my boy. This is the one I raised. We sat on the back porch and he told us how well things were going, how he had a new deal in the works, how maybe we should think about letting him manage some of our retirement funds. Just a portion, he said, just to get the compound growth working in our favor. Ray leaned forward when Nathan said that. I watched my husband's face go from curious to hopeful, and I felt something cool pass through me. Not alarm, exactly. More like a door I hadn't noticed swinging open. I changed the subject. That fall, my sister Gwen came to visit from Wichita. She and I are 13 months apart, and have always been the kind of sisters who can sit in a room together, without talking, and still feel like we're having a conversation. On her second night with us, after Ray had gone to bed and we were sharing a glass of wine at the kitchen table, She said something that stopped me cold. "I saw Nathan at the Walmart on 71st last month," she said. "He was with a woman, young, maybe 30. He introduced her as his girlfriend." She paused. "Ruthie, he told her your house was his." I set my glass down. "He said he was renovating it, that he owned it." I didn't sleep that night. I want to be clear about something. I am not a naive woman. I worked as a paralegal for 19 years before I retired. I have read contracts, depositions, affidavits. I know what fraud looks like on paper. What I didn't know, what nobody warns you about, is what it looks like when it's your own child. When it's someone who called you from the hospital at 2 in the morning because he'd gotten his first apartment and heard a noise and was scared. When it's someone you held while he cried at his grandfather's funeral. The paper skills don't transfer. The love gets in the way like fog. I started paying closer attention. I made a copy of our most recent bank statement without telling Ray. I called our financial advisor, a man named Gerald who had managed our IRAs since 2004, and asked him to send me a full accounting of our accounts. I told him it was for tax purposes. It wasn't. When the envelope came, I sat in my car in the driveway and opened it before I went inside. Nathan's name was on 2 accounts I had never authorized. Gerald called me back that afternoon. He seemed confused, said that Ray had added Nathan as a joint holder on the investment account in September, and as a beneficiary with immediate access rights on the secondary savings in October. Both changes had been made in person. Both had Ray's signature. I asked Gerald to freeze everything pending a review. He hesitated. Ray was technically the primary account holder on both, but I told him I had reason to believe there had been undue influence, and as a former paralegal I used that phrase deliberately, and Gerald, to his credit, put a temporary hold on outgoing transfers while he consulted with his compliance department. Then I drove to our bank and did the same thing there. That evening I made dinner like nothing had happened. Chicken and rice, Ray's favorite. I set the table and poured his iced tea and waited until he was halfway through his plate before I asked him, as gently as I could, when he had added Nathan to our accounts. The pause that followed was the longest of our marriage. Ray put his fork down. He looked at me the way someone looks at you when they've been holding a weight for so long they've forgotten what it's like not to carry it. He said Nathan had come to him in August. Said he was in trouble, real trouble, the kind with people Ray didn't want to know about. He'd begged Ray not to tell me because he knew I would say no. And Ray, my husband of 38 years, the man who had never once lied to me about anything that mattered, had said yes. "I thought I could fix it quietly," he told me. I reached across the table and took his hand. I was not angry at Ray. I want to make that clear. What I felt was grief, the particular grief of watching someone you love try to protect you from something, and only make it worse, the way you sometimes can when you love too much and think too little. We talked until midnight. Ray told me Nathan had taken $62,000 from the investment account over 14 months. He had done it in increments small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. He had also, we discovered the next morning, when Ray called our insurance agent, taken out a second policy on our home naming himself as beneficiary, something that required our signatures, which meant he had forged them, or Ray had signed something without reading it carefully, or both. We called Philip. My older son drove down from Tulsa the next morning. He sat at our kitchen table and listened to everything without interrupting, the way he's always done. And then he said 3 words. "We call attorneys." Nathan didn't know we knew. That was the only advantage we had. In January, Nathan called to say he'd booked a cabin for the 3 of us, him, Ray, and me, up near Robbers Cave State Park. A late Christmas gift, he said. He'd rented a place near the cliffs overlooking Sansbois Creek. He wanted to take us on a hike, he said. Get back to nature, reconnect as a family. I remember sitting on my bed after the call, phone in my lap, understanding for the first time in my life what it means when people say they felt the earth shift. I called Philip. He said not to go. I said I agreed. Ray sat very still for a long moment and then said, If we don't go, he'll know. We talked for 2 hours. We went back and forth. Philip wanted to go to the sheriff immediately. Ray said we didn't have enough documented yet, that the account records were still being compiled by Gerald's compliance team, that if we tipped Nathan off before we had everything in order, he would disappear the money and we'd never recover it. In the end, we made a decision I have second-guessed every day since. We went, but we also told Philip exactly where we were going, which trail, which time. We told Gwen. Ray wrote everything down on paper. Account numbers, forged documents, Nathan's girlfriend's name, and left it in our fireproof safe with a note on top that said, "If we don't call by 4 p.m. on Saturday, open this and call the LaFleur County Sheriff." We drove up on a Friday afternoon. Nathan was already at the cabin when we arrived, cheerful in the way he gets when he wants something. The charm turned all the way up. He'd bought groceries. He built a fire. He made Ray a bourbon and me a cup of chamomile tea without being asked. Because he remembered. Because that's Nathan, the boy who remembered everything and used it. Saturday morning was cold and clear, the kind of January day in eastern Oklahoma where the sky is so blue it hurts. We had breakfast and Nathan said the hike was a short one, maybe 45 minutes out to a lookout point, easy terrain. He was dressed for it. I noticed he wore boots with good traction and thought nothing of it at the time. We walked maybe 20 minutes before the trail narrowed. Ray was ahead of me by a few steps, Nathan behind me. I remembered the sound of the creek below, the way sound carries differently in winter when the leaves are gone. I remember looking out at the view. It really was beautiful. That ridge, the kind of landscape that makes you understand why people stay in Oklahoma, even when they say they're leaving. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. I felt hands on my back, both of them open-palmed, and then a shove that wasn't tentative at all. It was practiced, deliberate, the kind of force that tells you someone has imagined this moment more than once. I heard Ray shout my name. I didn't fall clean. I hit a ledge about 8 feet down that broke my fall and tore through my jacket and into my shoulder. I lay there trying to understand what had just happened to my body. Then I heard Ray land somewhere to my left. He wasn't moving. Nathan's voice came from above, calm, almost conversational. He called down once. I think he was checking. And I lay completely still with my face against the cold rock and did not make a sound. Beside me, I heard Ray breathing, shallow and fast. And then very quietly, barely above a whisper, he said, "Don't move. Don't make a sound. Not yet." We lay there for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 12 minutes. I counted my own heartbeats because it gave me something to do that wasn't screaming. The rock beneath me was wet and cold and smelled like iron and dead leaves. My shoulder was on fire. Ray reached out at some point and found my hand and held it. When we heard nothing above us for a long time, Ray said, "Now." We moved carefully, the way you move when you don't know what's broken. My shoulder was badly torn, rotator cuff, I'd later learn, plus a hairline fracture in my collarbone. Ray had broken 2 ribs and his left wrist. We climbed sideways along the ledge. Not up. Up was where Nathan might be, but along until the rock face sloped enough that we could get purchase on the frozen ground and pull ourselves back to level terrain, 100 yards east of where we'd gone over. Ray had his cell phone in his chest pocket. It had survived the fall. He called Philip first, then 911. We sat against a pine tree in the cold and waited. Ray's face was gray, and he was shaking, and I put my good arm around him, the way I have done in hospital waiting rooms and at funerals and during the worst nights. And we didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. Or there was too much. And none of it was for that moment. Nathan was arrested at a gas station outside Wilburton at 6:15 that evening. He had apparently driven 40 minutes in the wrong direction before doubling back. The sheriff's deputy told us later that Nathan had seemed surprised, genuinely surprised, when the patrol car pulled up behind him. I don't know what that means. I've thought about it many times. The charges were serious. 2 counts of attempted murder, forgery, elder financial abuse, which is a felony in Oklahoma and carries penalties most people don't realize exist until they're staring at the paperwork. His girlfriend cooperated with investigators early and received a reduced charge for her testimony. She confirmed that Nathan had researched the trail, had visited the site once in November alone, had talked about our life insurance policies by name. The financial crimes alone would have put him away for years. The attempted murder added decades. I did not go to every court date. Philip went. Gwen went. Ray went when he was well enough, and then he went when he wasn't, because Ray has always been the kind of man who believes in looking at hard things directly. I went to the sentencing. I made myself go because I needed to see it concluded with my own eyes. Nathan looked thinner. He didn't look at me when they read the verdict, but just before they took him out, he turned and found my face and held it for a moment. I don't know what he was looking for. I don't know if I gave it to him. The house on Maple Creek Road is still ours. We got back approximately $47,000 of the $62,000. The rest is likely gone in ways that would take another year of legal proceedings to trace, and Ray and I decided we were finished spending our energy that way. Gerald helped us restructure everything. New accounts, updated beneficiary designations, a trust that Philip helped us set up with a proper estate attorney. The second insurance policy was rescinded. We still go to the same Italian place on Friday nights. We still argue about the thermostat. Ray's wrist healed well, though it aches in cold weather, and my shoulder will never be entirely what it was, but I can garden again, which is the thing that matters most to me. People sometimes ask me how I've made peace with it, and the honest answer is that I haven't. Entirely. And I'm not sure peace is the right word anyway. What I've done is find a way to hold two things at once. The person Nathan is now, and the boy he used to be. I don't know if those two people are the same person or different ones. I don't know if what he became was always in there, something I missed, or if it grew in the dark when I wasn't looking. I have stopped trying to solve that particular equation. What I know is this. I am 63 years old. I have a husband who whispered my name from 6 feet away in the dark and reached for my hand before he knew whether either of us would make it out. I have an older son who drove through the night without being asked. I have a sister who noticed something I hadn't let myself see. I have a garden coming back up through cold ground and a Friday night reservation I intend to keep for as long as I'm standing. That, I have decided, is enough. It is more than enough. It is, on most days, everything. People want to know when I knew. When exactly? And I always have to tell them the honest answer, which is that I knew and didn't know at the same time, for longer than I'm comfortable admitting. There's a particular kind of blindness that comes from love. Not stupidity, not weakness, but the very human tendency to interpret what we see through the lens of what we hope. I looked at Nathan and saw my boy. The bank statements were right there. The math was right there. And still I waited, because some part of me kept waiting for an explanation that would make it not be what it was. That's not a character flaw I've forgiven myself for easily. It took time. What I understand now is that the moment I stopped waiting and started looking, really looking, with the same clear eyes I'd used for 19 years reading other people's legal documents, was the moment things began to shift. Not because anything outside me had changed, because I had. There is something in each of us that knows the truth before we're ready to say it out loud, and the gap between knowing and saying is where the real damage lives. What Nathan did was a choice, a long series of choices made over years in private, each one a little further from the person he could have been. I don't believe people are born with that kind of cold calculation. I believe it grows quietly when someone decides that what they want matters more than what they owe the people who loved them first. Every time he forged Ray's name, every time he stood in our kitchen and accepted our hospitality while draining our accounts, he was making a choice. The law calls it elder financial abuse and attempted murder. I call it what happens when a person spends years practicing not caring until they're capable of standing at the top of a cliff and letting go. Ray made choices too. He chose to protect me from something he thought he could handle alone, and that choice nearly cost us everything. I don't hold it against him. I understand it completely because I recognize the impulse. What I've learned is that protecting someone you love by keeping them in the dark is not protection. It is a kindness that becomes a trap. Real partnership means bringing the hard thing into the light together, even when you're afraid of what they'll feel when they see it. Philip's choices carried us through. He drove down without hesitating. He said 3 words and meant them. He sat at our table and listened before he spoke. And then when he spoke, it was the right thing. I have spent 38 years watching Ray be steady and good. And I think some of that steadiness passed to our older son the way things pass through families. Not genetically, but by proximity, by example, by the accumulated weight of watching someone choose integrity over and over until it becomes the only available option. What I carry forward from all of it is simpler than people expect. I am more careful now, not more fearful. There is a difference. Careful means I read what I sign. Careful means I ask the question even when I'm afraid of the answer. Careful means I trust Ray completely and also keep my own eyes open, because love without clarity is just hope. And hope alone has never balanced a single account. Nathan will be in prison for a long time. I think about what he might have been. I don't think about it as often as I used to. What I think about most is Ray's hand finding mine on that cold rock, before either of us knew we were going to be all right. That moment contained everything I need to remember about what matters and what doesn't. The rest, I'm still working out. At 63, I think that's exactly as it should be.